That's the foreign language and others. Come on in.
Okay.
The R2-D2 here was built by the R2 builders for DK Books for an author's tour on the East Coast, made out of fiberglass and plastic, and then it was on display at a celebration, and then I got it by making a contribution in their name to Make-A-Wish, and just a great piece, and so it ties together. I mean, it belongs in the library. So we've got, the novelizations and what used to be called the Expanded Universe and is now called Legends. I mean, people freaked out when that first announced. It doesn't change anything. They were never part of the canon, and now there's going to be more canon, and so they're beginning to understand that. This guy posed for this picture in 2014, and I've got to tell you that just yesterday I was very excited. I have completed now my collection of 2014 Guinness Book of World Records in every language in which they were published. I just got the Czech Republic one yesterday, which had gotten lost in the mail and had to be rebought. Now I'm going to submit for a Guinness record for the No, I'm not. This is the most expensive Star Wars book ever produced. So it was $3,000. And this was totally George's idea, and originally it was going to be like $5,000. Part of that obviously is the case and the medallion. So if you look at it this side, we call this sort of the Yoda Coffin. But the idea was George wanted a set of books that, and he signed a piece in there, a set of books. I'm going to ask you, Justin, if you would, both of you, that would be great. So he wanted to feature the cinematography, and so he spent months going through thousands of frames from each of the movies, making his selection, and there were problems along the way, quality of when the first test pieces came back, and he wasn't very happy with it. But I mean, it's a pretty amazing book. I mean, the problem obviously is it's also a very expensive, one of my favorites. Poor Han. Yeah. Oh well. So when I finally got my book, I wasn't going to buy it. It's awfully expensive, and then I felt I had an obligation to people coming here. That's how I justify things. And so my book arrives. It was one of the first. And this was supposed to be limited to 1,138 copies. I don't know where that number comes from. But anyway, so when this arrived, the whole top had been split off. And I thought, oh, well, poor packaging. And then I noticed that a piece of the molding was gone. And somebody had just put in gray putty. I could still see the thumbprint and the fingerprint. And so I thought, quality control, really bad. So I called up the head of publishing. I was still working for Lucasfilm. And she said, well, what about the books? And I said, what about them? They're still wrapped in plastic. And she said, open them now. And I said, why? And she said, George just got his volume today. And he opened up episode 4. And 16 pages fell out. Ooh. And what made it worse is the publisher had threatened not to go ahead with the project because it was becoming too expensive and they were going to lose money. And they said they would declare bankruptcy if they made them follow the. So George ponied up $1 million to get the book finished. As it was, there were probably only about 400 that were printed, not 1138. George gave away about 125. And we 50 to 75 had to be destroyed because of the poor quality. When I opened the books, I found glue on pages and crinkled pages, and it's hard to keep a book like this in really excellent condition. So instead of $3,000, you can get this, and so they've done a smaller version with 2 photos per page. It's the same photos, 2 volumes. And you can also use it in your weight training because it weighs about 30 pounds. Yeah. Same thing with the Blueprints book. This is a wonderful, wonderful book that contains a lot of information But it is so big and so heavy that if you take it to bed with you to read, you may not wake up the next morning. And so then they've done a smaller version of the book, and this is a lot easier to deal with, and it also lets me tell some stories about, how did I lose that? There we go. About my favorite ship, and everybody's favorite ship, the Millennium Falcon. So this is the original Millennium Falcon, and you're going to say, no, that's the blockade runner. Well, but it was the original design for the pirate ship. And the problem was that Space 1999 appeared on television, and their main ship was the Eagle. And it was long and narrow. It didn't look like this, but George was afraid it was going to take people out of the movie, and they're going to say, wait a second, isn't that? And so George, being a very visual guy, said, okay, he's having lunch with Joe Johnston of the ILM and several of the other guys, and said, okay, we need to come up with a different design for the Falcon. And George was eating his favorite food, well, actually the only thing that George ate, which was a hamburger. And so he had taken the bun off, and he was like staring at the hamburger from the stories I get. And then he reaches over and takes an olive out of the tray in the middle of the table and says, you know, most cockpits are like they put in the middle. Why don't we offset this to one side? And then picks up his fork, and using only technical terms as George would, let's put some doohickeys up front here. So here is George's hamburger, here's his olive, and here are his doohickeys. So, and then they came up with reasons for all of this, and you know this, but that's how the Millennium Falcon design concept came about. So